How's it going, everybody out there? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel. Now, excuse all the black that I'm wearing right now. We're getting a little bit of goth into this video, mainly because of the game that we're going to talk about today. So over on my social media, both on Twitter and Instagram, I asked a bunch of you guys, what review do you want to see from me next? What game exactly do you guys want me to talk about? And surprisingly enough, a bunch of you out there really wanted me to talk about the Legacy of Kain, which, to be honest with you, was super surprising to me. Now, if I'm being totally honest with all of you, I never once played the original Legacy of Kain game that was on the first PlayStation. It's just something that just never happened, despite all the other games that I've played throughout the series. Is the first Legacy of Kain game still as iconic and classic on the first PlayStation? Well, let's find out together. This is the Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen. Ooh, it sounds so epic, doesn't it? The Legacy of Kain Blood Omen is an action-adventure game released for the original PlayStation back in 1996 by Silicon Knights, but it later came out on Windows PCs in 1997. It's the first game in the series that spawned a number of sequels across various platforms, but it's a very different game than those games that came afterwards for a number of reasons. The best comparison I can make to this are the Diablo games on PC, where dark and gothic style visuals are accompanied by overhead action RPG gameplay. Anybody that's played Diablo or even bothered playing games that are very similar to it will probably say the same thing. But what's the story here? Blood Omen takes place in the world of Nosgoth, a dark and corrupt fantasy world. A nobleman named Kain is killed by a bunch of bandits and resurrected by dark forces as a vampire. Kain takes revenge on those who killed him, but now seeks a cure for his vampirism, which eventually becomes intertwined with seeking out and destroying the corrupted group known as the Circle of the Nine. I won't get too much into the story because a lot of this game is so reliant on how much you embrace the plot and the world of the series, but trust me, it's pretty darn good. It's the writing and the voice acting that make this game so interesting and helped build the foundation for the rest of the series. Things just sound so epic and important when you hear Simon Templeman give commentary about what is happening to Kain and Nosgoth. It will damn near send chills down your spine. Here's a fun fact for you. Amy Hennig worked on Blood Omen as a design manager and writer for later entries of the series. She's the same person who later went on to create the Uncharted series for Naughty Dog on both the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4. But that aside, does Blood Omen still hold up as a classic PlayStation game? Well, it's kinda complicated. Now let me start off by saying that the voice acting of this game still holds up even today. I pretty much agree with what everybody has said about the entire Legacy of Kain series, and it really shows even in this first early game that pretty much started everything else. The voice acting and just the dialogue and all the commentary and the narration just sounds freaking phenomenal. Every time you get that narration from Kain, even the smallest detail or just the smallest inane thing about the world of Nosgoth feels like it's got a legend, it's got some sort of epic side story related to it. It just sounds so freaking cool. Let me give you guys an example of how epic and how awesome this narration is. Just imagine me just looking at you guys here on camera and having that awesome Kain voiceover just come on. Like, look at this for example.
The town of Stenschenkrow bore with it the infamous aroma of its inhabitants. In life, I would not have graced the place with my presence. In death, I merely added to the stench.
You see what I mean? I just love the voice acting of this game. Everything about it just sounds so epic. That's the best way to describe it. And it's a cool trend and something that really stood out for the Legacy of Kain series that stuck with it even in the later on sequels. Now, despite all of this, I do have to comment on the visuals, which are very hit or miss depending on your preference of style, especially with early PlayStation games. It's a little hard to criticize them for this reason. The only thing I can really say about these visuals is that the CG graphics and the cutscenes haven't really held up as well throughout the years. I mean, the PlayStation era was all about like making real-life characters based on these polygons, and as a stylized look, it really hasn't aged too well. In addition, when you're running around the world of Nosgoth and you're getting into all types of battles or just exploring the world around you, the graphics of this game, they're pretty much very similar to that of Diablo, even though it's a little bit of a mixture with some of the stuff you see on traditional PlayStation games, especially early on back in that day. But even so, it's very dark, it just hasn't aged all too well. Some of it looks a little bit bland depending on what area you're in the game, but even so, some people might write this off as just kind of being like, you know, a product of its time. But if we're just looking at it, you know, as a complete package, the visuals are kind of meh. So putting aside graphics and epic narration, which is still freaking cool by the way, let's talk about the gameplay of Blood Omen, which isn't all that great, but it's for a variety of different reasons. Seriously, I just have to be straight up with you guys. Like, let's just dive right into this disaster. I don't even know where to start with this one. Everything about Blood Omen in terms of gameplay hasn't aged well at all. Even the dark, edgy visuals that should look cool instead look really terrible, mostly because everything you see is way too dark the majority of the time. Things blend into each other way too much, and it makes it very hard to distinguish between things like switches and other background objects. The skeleton of games like Diablo are there, but the possible technical limitations of the console back then make this game feel like garbage to play through. Your overhead view is exactly like in Diablo, with combat and magic being used just the same. You could zoom in the camera on your position or pull out for a better view, though I ended up staying far away just so I can make things out a little bit better, but even then that could be frustratingly difficult. In combat, you could gain health from your enemies by draining them of your blood before dealing a fatal blow. This ends up being a huge part of the areas you explore and keeping yourself alive. The hit detection is very wonky, however, which always led to me wildly attacking and hoping that any of my attacks had hit my target and dealt enough damage in order for me to drain their blood. Spells can look cool, but they can also be a pain to land on some targets. Outside of that, Nosgoth is a big world, so you'll have to travel around in different ways, including using abilities like turning into a giant wolf, fast traveling around as a bat, or even taking on a disguise to sneak past certain enemies. There's some neat ideas in here that should work pretty well, but a combination of poor in-game presentation and very buggy interactions completely mess things up. It's a shame because the world of Nosgoth is described in such a cool way through Kain's dialogue, but what you get with Blood Omen's gameplay just doesn't match up to the same level of quality. Now I am totally down with borrowing certain elements of classic games like Diablo or anything similar and trying to implement that stuff into something brand new and interesting, but what you're getting with the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen is very mediocre and half-hearted in the way that it's presented and executed. Unlike some of those games where you're getting like experience or you're gathering loot and stuff whenever you get into battle with enemies, in the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen you don't get anything of that. Every once in a while you can refill your health by like draining the blood of your enemies, but other than that, you're getting nothing from getting into any sort of battle in this entire game. Now I do have to admit there is a bunch of different powers that are pretty damn cool that you could find and discover and obtain as you journey through Nosgoth. Some of the stuff that you could do including turning into a wolf, turning into a bat, getting a disguise to sneak past enemies, stuff like that is very freaking cool. But again, you're not getting any sorts of like, sense of character growth, you're not really getting anything per se as you journey throughout Nosgoth throughout the entirety of the story. You're really only just playing this game for the story itself. But even then, I do have to admit that it can get very frustrating, very annoying, and very confusing trying to figure out where you need to go next to progress the story, especially if you're backtracking to certain areas that you've already been to before, but you want to go back and get certain things you might have missed out on. The game never truly gives you any sort of inclination of where you need to go to next, unless you happen to run into a certain area or run into certain dialogue on accident, and then in that case you could kind of figure out what you need to do so at that point. But even then, if you're backtracking, if you want to get like all the secrets in this game or just discover all the different spells, it can be very annoying once you go to certain areas and then you have to kind of like fiddle your way around the world trying to figure out, okay, where's the next area I need to go to? What's the next boss I need to kill? Or what's the next like event I need to trigger? That could get very, very frustrating. But let me tell you guys right here and now, there is absolutely no way that any of this compares to the next thing that we need to talk about, which to me, in my experience, man, it was the most frustrating, most annoying, and almost rage-inducing aspect of the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen. All the bugs, glitches, and more importantly than anything else, the loading screens. Seriously, how do you end up with a loading screen just to get to a loading screen after coming off a loading screen? Just to go into another loading screen? How the heck does that work out? Okay then, the biggest problem here is that everything you do gets bogged down by loading screens. Seriously, even simply going into the menus or moving around from one area to the next requires another loading screen. It gets so bad that when you try to do something while dialogue is playing after an event, the game will actually freeze until the dialogue finishes before loading up and opening a menu.
Stench of death clings to you.
The interior was as cold and sterile as the snow outside, with empty suits of armor and sharp, cruel steel lining the walls.
To me, this completely kills the experience and makes it nearly unplayable on PlayStation. I'm not sure if this same thing happens on PC, but it happened to me so much for the console version. Another thing that kept happening was how inconsistent enemies and boss fights acted in battle. Sometimes lower enemies could be dispatched super quickly without much hassle, but then all of a sudden become bugged out and borderline unkillable in others. It baffled me so much how wildly these difficulty spikes could be, especially with the bosses. And then there's the game over screen, which I vote as being 100 times worse than any other game over screen there ever was on PlayStation, including Symphony of the Night. Yes, I said it, people, it's that bad. And with how spread out and spare the save points can be throughout the game, you might find yourself getting a game over and have to replay nearly an hour of your gameplay, just like what happened to me. There were a few times I nearly rage quit because I had to repeatedly go through certain sections multiple times because I couldn't get to a save point anywhere nearby. It's unnecessarily annoying and makes things so much more difficult. Anybody who doesn't have the patience for this kind of stuff in their games will definitely not enjoy playing through Blood Omen. I seriously cannot stress enough to you guys just how annoying and frustrating this stuff can be. Seriously, all this stuff combined really just kills the experience of playing through Blood Omen. It made it to a point where I just didn't want to finish the game. Out of maybe the 12 or so hours it takes to complete Blood Omen, I really probably didn't even get past like the 7 or 8 hour mark, just because again, the loading screens, the inconsistency with the difficulty spikes, again, just being out of whack, just everything feel like it was like half-hearted and broken. It just felt like just everything was falling apart at some point while I was going through the game. And while I understand that some people still look at this game as a classic on the PlayStation 1, there are so many other ambitious and bigger games that are part of the PlayStation's library that don't have these issues, especially the loading stuff. It's just like so boggles the mind for me. Now, I do understand in certain sections that do end up being like, you know, ridiculously stupid and difficult, you could do a couple stuff that like cheeses the combat system. You could like really use spells a certain way, or just kind of like game the system and like abuse the computer's AI and such. But even then, it just made all this stuff really not that fun to play at some point. I was like walking around the worlds of Nosgoth trying to figure out what to do, and I was like, you know what? I'm just not enjoying myself with any of this. Maybe with all these things that I mentioned is probably the main reason why not a lot of people that are fans of the Legacy of Kain really talk about the first Blood Omen game. They usually talk about Blood Omen 2 or even the Soul Reaver series. I could totally understand that if that was the case. And maybe there's the possibility that the PC version of the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen doesn't really have these same type of issues, but I can only really base my thoughts on what I played. And I played the PlayStation version, which is usually the version that everybody really refers to when they're talking about Blood Omen. And to be honest with you guys, everything about this just makes the entire experience a complete wreck. So with all that being said, can I really recommend that you guys check out, but you know what? I can't even finish that sentence without saying absolutely not. Heck no. This game is just not fun to play through, definitely hasn't held up throughout the years. It just ends up being a really mediocre, really terrible experience all in all. And even with me saying that, there is still some cool elements about this game that still hold up and that are prevalent throughout the Legacy of Kain series. Specifically, the narration and the voice acting has still held up even after all these years. But everything else that's built around it is just not that great. It doesn't hit that same level of quality. If you were curious about the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen, I'm pretty sure you could find it cheap either on the PlayStation Network or anywhere else on PC, but even so, I would really not recommend this game pretty much to anybody. I would say that just look up some of the synopses online and check out some of the later games in the series, specifically the Soul Reaver series, which I hear much more better things about it, especially within that era of PlayStation games, but if we're just talking about Blood Omen, this one really isn't all that good. And there you go. Those are my thoughts on the Legacy of Kain Blood Omen. It's not that great. It hasn't held up throughout the years. It's meh, and I can't recommend it to any of you guys to go back and play it. It's really that bad. But those are just my opinions about the game. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section down below. Do you agree or disagree with me? What are some of your favorite Legacy of Kain games? Like, do you like the series overall? Do you hate it? Put it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to leave a like on this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos like this one, and don't forget to check out my Patreon page. I have a ton of content on there that I know you guys are going to love. For the dollar level or higher, you're going to get a lot of content, including early access to all my videos. Stuff you definitely need to check out. Links in the description box down below. And also, I want to tell you guys again, I have an open Discord server that you guys can join. There's a whole bunch of great people in there that love talking about video games, movies, anime, and a whole bunch of other geeky and nerdy stuff. You guys can definitely join up and bring some friends. There's links in the description box down below. Feel free to share with anybody else. We're an open community. We welcome everybody that just loves some of the stuff that we love talking about. It's a pretty cool place. I highly recommend that you guys join. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys. I will talk to all of you again very soon. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Make sure you guys check out some of these other videos in the boxes after the credits, and don't forget to visit my Patreon page via the annotations for more exclusive content. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.